What if the girl you insulted in front of everyone turned out to be the daughter you lost 18 years ago? He called her a mistake. He shattered her dignity. But one DNA test later, his entire world collapsed. Stay with us. Because when the truth hits, it doesn't knock. It destroys. The scent of polished glass and synthetic perfection filled the air as Damien Wexler stepped into the flagship store of his billion-dollar retail empire, his shoes clicking sharply against the marble floor, bodyguards flanking him in silence. He wore a tailored charcoal suit, a titanium watch, and the gaze of a man who had everything, except patience. His visits were rare and always unannounced. Managers trembled. Employees froze. Cameras turned discreetly. And then there was her, Sophie. Stationed at Register 3, hair tied back, sleeves rolled up, her uniform slightly faded from overuse. She didn't recognize him, didn't flinch, just kept helping the elderly janitor struggling to lift a heavy box near the front display. Damien noticed, scowled. "Why is the cashier touching inventory?" he snapped to the floor manager. The manager stammered. She's just helping Mr. Grady." Damien cut him off. "He's a janitor. She's a cashier. This is not a charity." He stormed over, and Sophie stood straight, eyes wide but firm. "Sir," he was about to fall. "You were just doing the wrong thing," Damien growled, his voice cold steel. "Do your job or find another one." Sophie blinked. "Excuse me." The room stilled. Damien took a step closer. "You heard me. You're not special. You're a mistake that should have never been hired." Something inside Sophie cracked, but she didn't show it. She simply nodded once, lips trembling, and walked out the front door without another word. She didn't cry, not yet, but the moment the doors closed behind her, she collapsed against the cold brick wall outside, heart pounding, chest tight, wondering why those words felt like they had ripped something deeper than skin and Damien. He didn't even turn around. He just adjusted his cufflinks and said, "Clean this up," not knowing that what he'd just thrown away was the only piece of his soul still left in the world. 18 years earlier, the sky over the city had been an endless gray, heavy with the kind of storm that knew it was arriving for more than just rain. In the sterile, echoing halls of St. Augustine Medical Center, Damien Wexler paced like a caged animal outside the maternity wing, his knuckles white around a disposable coffee cup he hadn't touched, his mind racing with thoughts of his wife, Elena, the only person who ever softened the iron in his voice. She'd gone into labor early, complications, they said, something about blood pressure and emergency decisions, too many monitors beeping at once. Then the doors burst open, and a doctor stepped out, face tight, not looking him in the eyes. "Mr. Wexler, your wife. I'm so sorry. We did everything we could." Damien staggered back a step, his world cracking beneath his feet, and the baby he managed, barely a whisper. The doctor hesitated. There was a complication, oxygen loss. The child didn't make it. Time stopped. The storm outside broke open and matched the one that shattered inside his chest. A scream tried to escape, but Damien buried it beneath decades of conditioning. He didn't cry, not there, not then. He simply nodded, turned away, and walked down the hall in silence, leaving behind the last piece of his heart in that whitewashed corridor. But down another wing of that same hospital, behind a misfiled chart and a panicked nurse's mistake, a tiny baby girl, alive, breathing, crying, was being wrapped in a thin pink blanket and tagged not as Lane Wexler, but baby girl. Unidentified, the storm had knocked out part of the hospital's digital system. A data error rerouted her paperwork to social services. Before anyone could correct it, she was placed into state custody. An overworked nurse tried to raise the alarm, but was quickly silenced by hospital administration, terrified of a lawsuit. The baby girl, nameless and alone, was handed to a foster agency without ceremony, her true identity lost in a bureaucratic fog. They gave her the name Sophie, and for the next 18 years, that name would be all she had. No photos, no family, just questions she never stopped asking. Why did no one ever come for me? Why don't I look like anyone I've ever lived with? Why does my heart feel like it remembers something my mind can't explain? And as Sophie grew, through broken homes, cold Christmases, whispered insults, and fleeting moments of warmth, she learned how to smile without feeling it, how to hope without expecting, and how to carry herself like someone who didn't need saving, but somewhere deep inside, buried beneath the survival, she always dreamed of one thing. Not wealth, not fame, just one answer. Who am I really? And on the day Damien Wexler looked her in the eyes and told her she was a mistake, something inside her broke not because of what he said, but because of something unexplainable. Something ancient and unspoken that screamed from her bones. Why does it hurt more coming from you? Rain tapped against the bus window in a slow, relentless rhythm as Sophie pressed her forehead to the glass, her breath fogging up a small circle while the city blurred past in streaks of red and white. Her uniform clung to her skin, cold and damp, and her tote bag felt heavier than usual, not because of what was inside, but because of what had just been ripped out of her. Damien Wexler's voice still echoed in her skull, cruel, precise, dismissive. You're a mistake that should never have been hired. The words shouldn't have mattered. He was just another rich man in a suit, another face she'd forget tomorrow. But they did. God, they did. Because they had pierced something deeper, something ancient, something she couldn't name but couldn't shake. She got off 3 stops early without thinking, her legs moving before her mind caught up, and wandered through the drizzle toward the old iron bridge that hovered above the river. Her quiet place, her nowhere sanctuary. The wind was sharp. The air smelled like rust and wet leaves. But it didn't matter. She stood at the railing, staring into the dark water, asking herself questions she couldn't answer. Why did it hurt so much? Why did his eyes feel familiar? She had faced worse. Foster parents who locked the fridge, classmates who sneered at her thrift store shoes, employers who asked too much and paid too little. But this stranger's gaze had cracked her in a way none of them ever had. It wasn't just the insult. It was the feeling that something had been lost and found and shattered all in one glance. She shook it off, went home, peeled off her soaked clothes, and sat on the edge of her mattress in silence. Her phone buzzed beside her. Notifications piling in. A viral video. Someone had caught it all. Cold CEO destroys young woman for helping janitor. Comments flooded the screen. She deserves better. Why are powerful men like this? What a monster. Sophie stared at the footage. At herself, standing there humiliated. Her hands trembling. Her voice soft but steady. But no comment. No sympathy. No online fury could fill the void that had just opened inside her. She reached into the drawer beside her bed and pulled out the old DNA kit she'd gotten from a college fair 6 months ago. She'd meant to do it, once, meant to find answers about where she came from, if anyone was out there, but life got busy. And she got tired. But now there was a fire inside her chest that wouldn't quiet down. She followed the instructions in silence, sealed the swab, labeled the envelope, and stared at her name written in pen. Sophie. No last name, no history, no story, just a girl tired of being invisible. She whispered into the silence of her room, I just want to know who I am. And somewhere, fate stirred, because the truth was already coming for her. And it carried the face of the very man who broke her. Damien Wexler sat alone in his penthouse office, the city glowing beneath him like a conquered kingdom. But tonight, the lights felt dimmer, the glass colder, the silence too loud. He poured a glass of whiskey with hands that rarely trembled, but now refused to steady. On the screen before him, the viral video looped, him pointing, shouting, belittling a girl half his age while she stood there, quiet, dignified, her eyes burning with something he couldn't place. He had watched it 27 times, and still, every time her face appeared, something in his chest twisted. Not guilt, not yet, but discomfort, a familiar discomfort. Like hearing a melody you'd long forgotten, but that still pulled tears from your throat. His assistant had called earlier, her voice tight. "Sir, the footage is everywhere. People are siding with the girl. She's trending. Sophie. Her name is Sophie. That name again, Sophie." It clung to his thoughts like static. He had barked at her, ordered a public relations response, then sat in the darkness and done nothing, because the truth was, he couldn't shake the way her eyes looked at him. Not with fear, not even with anger, but with something far worse: disappointment. The same look his late wife used to give him when he put power before people, profits before purpose. He hadn't dreamed of her in years, but tonight, as he dozed in that cold leather chair, he saw her, Elena, standing in the hospital hallway in that final memory, pale and weak, holding a swaddled bundle he was never allowed to touch. She's gone. They'd told him, your daughter didn't survive. And he had believed them, locked the pain in a vault inside his soul, and threw himself into building an empire no child would ever inherit. But now, something was wrong. He woke in a sweat, heart racing. That girl's eyes, her voice, the tilt of her head. He pulled out an old photograph, weathered at the corners. Elena, pregnant, smiling, holding his hand on a sun-drenched hill. He stared at her face, then opened the video again, paused it on Sophie. His heart stalled. There it was. The cheekbones, the eyes, the defiance, the unspoken sadness. He whispered into the dark, "No, no, it's not possible." But his voice betrayed him, because deep down, beneath the steel and the pride and the empire, something old and primal was beginning to rise. Recognition, and for the first time in years, Damien Wexler was afraid. The days passed like a slow-moving storm, heavy with something unseen, and Sophie couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming, something big, something ancient. She tried to focus on her classes, tried to keep her head down as classmates whispered about the viral video, about the girl who stood up to the billionaire, but none of it mattered now, not when her entire body buzzed with a question too big for words. Then one afternoon, as she stood outside her mailbox in the drizzle, a small white envelope with gold lettering slipped into her trembling hands. Her name was printed neatly on the front. Sophie. No last name. Still a ghost. She took it upstairs, locked her bedroom door, sat on the floor, and stared at it for a full minute before tearing it open with a breath that felt like it might rip her lungs apart. She unfolded the results, her eyes scanning quickly, desperately, until they landed on one line, printed in bold, parental match, Damien Wexler, 999%. The room vanished. The air was gone. Her vision blurred as a scream formed in her throat but never made it out. Her heart beat so hard it felt like it might shatter her ribs. She dropped the paper, picked it up, dropped it again. She wasn't reading it wrong. She wasn't dreaming. The man who had humiliated her, the man who had looked her in the eyes and called her a mistake, was her father. The man she had wondered about her entire life, imagined as kind or maybe broken, maybe searching for her too. He had found her and destroyed her without even knowing. She curled into herself on the floor, the rain tapping softly on the windows as if mocking her. Everything she had built inside to survive, the strength, the dignity, the armor, crumbled in seconds. She wasn't angry, not yet. She was something worse. She was lost. Again, just like when she was a child staring at the ceiling of another strange house, wondering why no one ever came for her. But now she knew why. He hadn't known she existed. And when he saw her, truly saw her, he hated what he saw. Or maybe he hated himself. Either way, it had torn something open in her that she wasn't ready to face. She whispered the word to herself, tasted its edges, trying to believe it, Father, and then louder, like it might give her power. He's my father. But all it gave her was silence. Cold, hollow, endless. Damien stared at the document in his hands as if it had been carved in fire. Each letter, each percentage, searing into his skin, into his bones, into the part of him he'd buried 18 years ago, with a name that never got spoken again, 99%. That number looped in his mind like a siren. There was no mistake, no way to deny it. The girl he humiliated, insulted, and discarded in front of a dozen witnesses and a million strangers online was his daughter. His daughter. He couldn't breathe. He couldn't speak. His office spun around him. Info bookshelves, floor-to-ceiling glass, boardroom screens glowing with data that suddenly meant nothing. He collapsed into the leather chair behind his desk, the DNA results trembling in his grip, knuckles white. The assistant who handed them to him stood frozen at the door, not daring to move, not knowing if she should comfort the man whose name struck fear in global markets. But Damien wasn't powerful now. He wasn't a tycoon. He wasn't a CEO. He was a father, and he had failed in a way so brutal it couldn't be measured in money or time. It could only be measured in absence. Memories crashed into him like waves. Elena's soft voice, her laughter, her swollen belly as she painted a nursery, the way she whispered, "She's going to have your fire," the way she screamed in that hospital room, the way the doctors looked away when he asked if the baby survived, the way he chose to believe them, to bury it, to survive the only way he knew how, by shutting it off. And now the fire his wife spoke of had grown into a girl who had looked him in the eyes and stood tall while he shattered her. He stood suddenly, knocking over the chair, the sound splitting the silence like a gunshot. "Get her on the phone," he rasped. "Now." The assistant hesitated. "Sir, she doesn't want to speak to you." Damien's jaw clenched. "Then find someone she will speak to. I don't care who. Just get me to her." But Sophie wasn't answering. Not texts, not calls, not media inquiries, not apologies. She had vanished, gone silent, and the more Damien tried, the more he realized she didn't want anything from him. Not money, not fame, not even truth. She just wanted distance. He stared at her photo, the freeze frame from the viral video, her chin high, eyes burning. He whispered into the empty room, "I didn't know. I swear I didn't know." But even he didn't believe that was enough. And outside, across the city, in a tiny apartment with creaking floors and peeling paint, Sophie sat in bed with the curtains drawn, holding the same letter, watching the same photo, whispering the same truth. "He's my father." But the harder truth was louder. He knew nothing about me. And when he saw me, he hated me anyway. The cameras flashed like lightning as Damien Wexler stepped into the press room, his face pale, drawn, haunted, not by scandal, not by reputation, but by the weight of a truth that had crushed him from the inside out. He walked slowly to the podium, not with the commanding stride of a billionaire, but like a man carrying a coffin no one else could see. The room fell silent. Reporters clutched notepads, lenses zoomed in, and the world held its breath for the first words from the man who had humiliated his own daughter on camera, only to find out days later that she was his. Damien stood there, eyes rimmed red, shoulders stiff, but something had broken. The arrogance, the certainty, the mask, gone. All that remained was a father drowning in grief. His voice cracked before it even rose. "I didn't know," he said, barely above a whisper. "If I had known, God, if I had known." He stopped, gripped the edge of the podium, knuckles white. 18 years ago, I was told my daughter died. I believed them. I buried her without ever seeing her face. I built a life around that pain. I buried myself in empire and numbers because feeling anything else hurt too much. A murmur swept through the room, but Damien pushed forward, his words sharper now, more raw. And then she walked into my company, into my life, into my line of fire, and I destroyed her without even knowing who she was. I looked at my own daughter and called her a mistake. I didn't just fail her as a father, I failed her as a human being. The silence was thick, suffocating. A reporter stood and asked softly, "Have you tried to reach her?" Damien nodded slowly, hollow. "She won't answer, and I don't blame her. She shouldn't. The world owes her an apology, but none greater than mine." He pulled something from his pocket, a folded photo, old, creased at the edges. Elena, radiant, holding their newborn daughter in the only photo that ever existed. He held it up like proof of his sin, his shame. She has her mother's fire. And now I see that fire turned against me, and I deserve every flame. His voice broke again, but he kept going. I don't want redemption. I'm not here to fix my image. I'm here because silence would be more cowardly than I've already shown. The world saw me at my worst. But she saw me with eyes that should have seen a father, and instead found a stranger. He stepped back, the podium trembling slightly under his grip, and for the first time in his career, he didn't take questions. He simply stood there, eyes brimming, lips pressed tight, then turned and walked off stage. And in a small apartment across the city, Sophie sat curled on the couch, phone in hand, screen dimmed but playing. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just watched, because part of her still hated him, and part of her had waited her whole life to hear that voice call her daughter, even if it was too late. The sky was overcast when Damien stepped out of the black car. No cameras, no press, no entourage, just him, alone, walking up the worn stone steps of the orphanage where Sophie had spent her childhood. He held nothing but a small folded letter in his pocket and a weight in his chest that words couldn't carry. The children inside didn't recognize him. Why would they? To them, he was just a man in a coat who walked too slowly, whose eyes looked like he hadn't slept in days. He entered the main room, where old toys lined sagging bookshelves and faint laughter echoed from behind cracked walls. The woman in charge, a silver-haired caretaker named June, stared in disbelief. "You're Damien Wexler," he nodded once, quietly. "I'm not here for a speech. I'm not here for a photo. I'm here because this is the only place I could come to understand who my daughter had to become without me." June softened. She used to sit right there by the window, never asked for much, just stared outside like she was waiting for someone who never showed up. Damien's hands shook. He walked to the window, touched the chipped frame, and imagined a tiny girl with dark eyes and quiet strength looking out, wondering why no one came for her. He dropped to one knee, not from drama, but because he couldn't stand under the weight of it all. His voice came out like gravel, to every child who ever waited and never saw headlights. "I'm sorry, I can't fix the past, but I can make sure no one else gets lost in silence again." One by one, the children began to gather, small faces filled with curiosity and kindness that cut him deeper than judgment ever could. He didn't tell them who he was. He just sat on the floor, answered their questions, and listened. For once in his life, he just listened, and in the shadows of the doorway, Sophie stood, unseen, arms crossed, heart pounding. She hadn't planned to be there, hadn't planned to see him. But she came anyway, something inside her pulling her like gravity, watching him on the ground, speaking gently to children who reminded her of herself. Something shifted. Not forgiveness, not yet, but a fracture in the wall she had built. She had expected pride, anger, control, but he looked small, human, and when he stood and quietly placed the folded letter on the windowsill, the one he had written not to be read, but to be left, Sophie felt something she hadn't in days' breath. She slipped away before he saw her, but she had heard every word, and for the first time since the truth broke her, it didn't feel like she was shattered, just open. The airport was quiet that morning, just the steady hum of wheels on tile, distant flight announcements, and the soft shuffle of passengers chasing new lives. Sophie sat near Gate 12 with a single suitcase and a heavy heart, a plane ticket to Geneva folded between her fingers. An elite fellowship offered to only 5 global scholars, the kind of opportunity most people could only dream of. She should have felt proud. She should have felt excited. But instead, her chest felt hollow, like she was leaving something unfinished. A book half read with pages still burning. The overhead speaker called her boarding group, but she didn't stand. She reached into her coat pocket, pulled out the letter from the orphanage windowsill. Creased at the edges, his handwriting steady but raw. She had read it 100 times. "I don't know if you'll ever forgive me. I wouldn't if I were you. But if the day comes when you need anything, My time, my name, my silence, my empire. It's yours, not because I expect your love, but because you were always mine. Her fingers trembled. The final line echoed louder than the rest. The world knows me as a builder of empires, but without you, I am nothing but a man with ruins. She closed her eyes, inhaled slowly, then stood, not toward the gate, but toward the exit. Half an hour later, in a small corner cafe near the old bookstore where she used to study, Damien Wexler sat alone, nursing a coffee gone cold, unsure why he was even there, except that some part of him hoped. The bell above the door jingled, and when he looked up, she was there, Sophie. No makeup, no speeches, just her. The moment froze, like the whole cafe held its breath. He stood too quickly, knocking his cup off the table, but neither of them cared. I didn't think you'd come. He said, I almost didn't, she replied. Silence stretched between them. Not awkward, but aching. I'm not here to fix anything, she said, voice firm. I'm not here to be your daughter. Damien nodded, eyes lowered. I know. She sat down anyway, but I needed to see if the man who wrote that letter actually existed. He met her gaze, and in that second, she saw it. Not the CEO, not the legend, just the man. And he asked. She looked away, out the window where two kids chased pigeons through the rain. I think, maybe you do, a little. Her voice dropped. You can't rewrite the past. Damien, you can't erase what I went through. I wouldn't dare, he said, but maybe we could start something new. Not from power, not from guilt, just from now. She looked at him, the man who had once shattered her, now waiting without demand, without pride. And for the first time, she didn't feel like a stranger to her own name. She extended a hand slowly. Hi, she said softly. I'm Sophie. He took it with both of his hands, shaking. Hi, Sophie, I'm your father. And the cafe didn't cheer, and the world didn't pause, but something in the air shifted, like two broken clocks ticking for the first time in sync. Not perfect, but real. The lights dimmed as Sophie stepped onto the stage. The hush that fell over the crowd was immediate, reverent, almost sacred. Not because of who she had become, but because of what she had survived. No spotlight followed her, no dramatic music played, just silence, thick with the weight of her truth. She stood behind the podium, hands resting gently on the edge, heart steady, gaze unwavering. Behind her, the screen read, The Missing Thread Foundation, because every life deserves to be found. She took a breath, and when she spoke, her voice was soft, but it carried like thunder. There was a time when I believed I came from nothing. No name, no story, just numbers in a file, dates on a chart, labels on envelopes, and I believed I didn't matter because the world never told me I did. But then I found the truth. Painful, complicated, human. And it shattered everything I thought I knew, because the man who humiliated me was also the man I had spent my whole life missing. The crowd didn't move. Even breaths were held. And yes, she continued, there was rage, there was grief, but underneath that, there was a thread, thin, nearly broken, but still connecting us, and I chose not to cut it. I chose to follow it. Into the dark, into the silence, into the mirror I was most afraid to face. Her voice didn't rise, but the emotion behind it did, and because of that choice, a daughter found her father, and a father found his redemption. She turned slightly, eyes drifting to the far end of the room, where Damien Wexler stood in the shadows. Not as a CEO, not as a billionaire, but as a man with his heart in his hands. Their eyes met, and in that single second, everything they had lost felt seen. This foundation isn't about me, she said. It's about every child who waited, every parent who didn't know. Every family is torn by time and silence. We will find them, and we will remind the world that no life is disposable. No soul is forgettable. No thread is ever truly lost. The room erupted in applause, but she didn't bask in it. She stepped down from the stage and walked directly to him, through the crowd that parted like a sea, their ovation echoing behind her. Damien didn't speak. He simply opened his arms, and when she reached him, she didn't hesitate. She fell into them, not as a stranger, not as a symbol, but as a daughter. His hands trembled around her back, and in that moment, neither of them was broken. They were just two halves that had finally found home. The crowd watched, not with pity, not with awe, but with something deeper, understanding. The screen slowly faded to black. One final line appeared, quiet and unshakable. Be kind, always. You never know whose story you're walking into, or who's walking into yours.